Like a corporate manager, pension funds are overseen by boards of directors who are usually appointed by the sponsors of the plan. These people are responsible for ultimately establishing an investment policy and supervising fund managers to make sure that they're safeguarding the best interests of the beneficiaries. As a best practice, directors ought to be regularly reporting the fund's returns, risks, solvency, and any degree of surplus or deficit. A particularly useful piece of advice for directors of pension plans comes from Ambakshir and Ezra's book in 1998 called Pension Fund Excellence. And in it, they cite that competent boards have a preponderance of people of character who are comfortable doing their organizational thinking in multi-year timeframes. These people understand ambiguity and uncertainty, and they're still prepared to go ahead and make the required judgments and decisions. They know what they don't know. They're prepared to hire a competent CEO, delegate management and operational authority, and are prepared to support a compensation philosophy that ties rewards to results. Ultimately, as the representative of the beneficiaries, the directors of a pension plan need to ensure that the plan is being operated in the best interests of those who are ultimately funding it. This, of course, means that sponsors have a say, that sponsors have a role to play, but it's important to recognize that the funds are ultimately being set aside for the benefits of pensioners. And therefore, it's important to apprise them of exactly what the state of affairs is so that they can make any sorts of necessary preparations if there are problems brewing on the horizon. Another important piece of advice that was provided regarding the design of pension plans was ensuring that we select the right kind of organizational design for its scale. Clearly, a pension plan with $100 billion under management might not be run the same way as a pension fund with $100 million under management, or one with just 2 or 3 million under management. In general, it's important for funds to recognize their limits, to get some idea about the extent of their expertise and their capacity to monitor complex portfolios and investments like private equity or international investments, which might require more of their attention. So the general rule that applies for value investing also applies in pension fund management, which is the idea that we should avoid buying investments or assets who we don't really understand. And this is important for the directors of pension funds, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be them who suffers losses as a result of a bad investment. It'll be the beneficiaries and perhaps even the sponsors if we're dealing with a defined benefit. So it's important not to overextend other people's money into risky categories where the directors don't really have a good comprehension of what risks they're exposing people to. In general, for small pension funds, they're usually best managed by small third-party investment firms. In some cases, we might transfer this to an insurance company, for instance, where they've got the advantage of in-house actuaries and enormous investment pools, such that small pension funds are able to piggyback on these larger organizations. The idea here, of course, being that there are a lot of fixed costs that individual pension funds would necessarily need to develop the expertise to manage. Meanwhile, if they were to pool their funds together in an external third-party manager, they could benefit from economies of scale by hiring the same managers or the same compliance officers or the same reporting people. Meanwhile, a larger fund might be able to spread those fixed costs associated with fund management more appropriately and can generally manage such affairs in-house if they choose to. They've got other problems, however. When you've got a particularly large pension fund, you've got to worry about market depth. For instance, if we consider the US Social Security Fund or Japan's General Pension Investment Fund, we're talking about literally trillions of dollars. And that can be very, very challenging to invest on a safe and consistently yielding basis. Secondly, we've got to worry about our ability to actually supervise something like $1 trillion portfolio. Not to mention that such a large portfolio creates opportunities for its managers to exert influence over the markets in which it's investing. When we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars or even trillions of dollars, this can lead to conspicuous influence that might be encounter resistance from various countries or national governments eager to safeguard their interests against foreigners. So there are advantages to larger pension funds, but it's important to recognize that there are costs associated with running these funds. Now, of course, an important component of staffing your organization properly and designing your pension fund for success is employing the right staff. When you're going to manage internally, if you're a large fund, for instance, then you need to focus on hiring the right kinds of investment professionals who've got strong backgrounds in their various asset classes. And then we need to establish performance-based incentives and invest in continuous education, both for the managers and their supporting researchers. In general, when you are managing in-house investments, it's important for boards to be actively learning from their staff so that they can ensure information asymmetries don't accumulate and that the incentives within the organization are properly aligned with the best interests of the beneficiaries. If, however, you're a smaller outfit and you're relying on outside managers, then you need to make sure that you're subjecting them to regular reviews in the same way that we might subject employees of a firm or even executives to a regular review. We need to be evaluating the performance of our outside managers. A couple of easy rules here might serve people quite well. First off, when employing outside managers, beware of any manager that offers to alter their style to fit the plan's needs. In general, no one can be good at everything. If you choose to employ multiple managers so that way you can benefit from their specialization in particular areas, you have to remember that this is also going to increase the governance burden as you'll have more managers to evaluate and monitor. Boards also need to be alert to conflicts of interest when they're outsourcing management, like advisors who channel funds into pools that kick back commission fees to them, or managers who actively charge management fees for effectively shadowing a broad stock market index. Finally, in terms of assessing, making sure you've got your staffing right, it's important to understand for both internal and external managers what the sources of their success are. So here's a few useful questions that directors might want to consider when they're evaluating either their internal managers or potentially third-party firms to whom they might outsource this task. Did the manager's results ultimately derive from a handful of decisions or from many small decisions? Has there been a material turnover in their support staff? Remember that managers don't make these decisions alone, that they're informed by the people around them about how to approach certain kinds of uncertainty. And a material turnover in the support staff can lead to worse or information moving uphill to your manager. So watch out for that in particular. And finally, try to understand the manager's investment process. Managers who insist on black boxing their decision-making and who can't explain them to directors who are ultimately paying them to manage money on behalf of beneficiaries, well, those are areas that are rife for conflicts of interest and generally should be avoided by pension fund directors who are hoping for more transparency. So it's important to keep these basic design principles in mind. As Drucker pointed out, having proper mission autonomy is important for pension plans so that sponsors don't meddle in the management of its portfolio. You also need to set appropriate targets because inappropriate targets could lead to irresponsible risk-taking behaviors. We need to think carefully about how we're going to organize governance to ensure that there's proper oversight of our professional managers and that the funds are being organized in a way that is most beneficial for the beneficiaries. We have to make sure that we are choosing appropriate designs for our scale. Small funds are managed differently than large funds. And regardless of how we choose to manage the funds, we have to ensure that we've got a right view of what kinds of staff we need to have on board in order to ensure the best results for pensioners.